Welcome to Authentic Accessibility, Disability Leadership and Inclusion. Hi, I'm Audrey Homan. I am a certified accessibility specialist and I work at the Center on Disability and Community Inclusion, also known as CDCI, at the University of Vermont. I am also a person with multiple disabilities. CDCI is actually Vermont's UCED, which is a University Center on Excellence in Developmental Disability. There are 68 UCEDs nationwide, and we are Vermont's. All of us belong to the Association for University Centers on Disability, AUCD. Now, CDCI has four main functions. We teach, we do outreach like this to share knowledge, we conduct research, we provide community services related to supporting people with disabilities and their families, and we tell stories. We help amplify the stories of people with disabilities in Vermont as well as the larger national community. So, today we're going to talk about three things related to creating authentic accessibility for your project. Number one, we're going to talk about the what and why of disability leadership. Number two, we're going to talk about how you can get started with disability leadership in your own project. And number three is we're going to talk about what it looks like to be inclusive in recruiting people with disabilities to your project. So, a fundamental rallying cry of disability studies and disability advocacy in the United States, especially, is quote unquote, nothing about us without us. For a long time in the United States, things were done to people with disabilities instead of with them. People with disabilities did not have agency in deciding the laws and regulations that governed their own lives. Other people were appointed as their guardians. Other people were appointed as people who knew better about disability than people with disabilities. So here is my colleague Max Barrows, who works at Green Mountain Self Advocates, which is a disability advocacy organization in Vermont. And Green Mountain Self Advocates recorded a series of videos featuring Max and other people with disabilities explaining more about the historical context and necessity of nothing about us without us. But when you are considering building an accessible improvements project, you want to understand that it has to include people with disabilities as agency makers, as change makers. Now, this can look like people with disabilities being designers of your study or designers of the changes, designers of your outreach material. We can be reporters, we can be storytellers. We're really good at telling our own stories. We're experts in the field of disability. We can be data collectors. We can help you collect data about what is inaccessible in your project and needs to be changed. We also need to be in positions of leadership with your project. And that can look like being a member of your board. That can look like being the president of your board or the chair of your committee. It can look like being a principal investigator on a study or a study author. Because you are dealing with, when you talk about accessibility, you're talking about changing conditions related to disability. People with disability need to be the ones who are leading the conversation and leading the change, directing the change. And most importantly, people with disabilities need to be paid for our work. For a long time in the United States, there was something known as sub-minimum wage. It is still allowable in several states today to pay people with disabilities less than the minimum wage simply because they have disabilities. If you are thinking to yourself, hey, that sounds like discrimination, it is. And we're working hard to change that nationwide. Vermont no longer allows sub minimum wage. And at CDCI, I'm going to share what we pay people with disabilities for their time when they are working with CDCI as an organization. So we publish a monthly podcast, and we estimate that if you're going to be a guest on the podcast, you're committing to an hour and a half of your time. And so we give you a $75 stipend. The stipend is available to people with disabilities or family members of people with disabilities. When you're a family member of someone in your immediate family who has a disability, you also qualify for this stipend. The same thing with our UX research study. UX stands for user experience. We're currently conducting a study to learn more about how people with disabilities interact with websites, specifically our own website, which we've started to redesign. We want with disabilities and family members of people with disabilities to tell us how it's working and how it could work better. This research study asks for an hour of people's time, and for that, they receive $40. We also have a community advisory council, which we refer to as our board. It's analogous to or similar to a board of directors. We estimate that when you meet with us, each meeting is 3 hours long, and we give a $60 stipend for the full amount of the time. The amount of money that we offer for the podcast episode in particular, we were able to raise from last year as we address that the cost of living in this country is going up. So it's important to have those conversations and to pay people for their work and think about how to pay people competitively for their work. The UX research study, the $40, it's a brand new study. It only opened up this past week in April 2025. So we feel like that is a competitive stipend for participating in the study. We especially need to be paid for our stories as people with disabilities. So, we publish a monthly podcast called Green Mountain Disability Stories. They're a series of conversations with, and about people with disabilities and family members of people with disabilities who share stories of how Vermont's systems support and thwart them. There has been recently, especially with the rise of quote unquote social media influencing, this idea that you can pay people with exposure. Don't do this. Not to people with disabilities and not to people without disabilities, but especially to people with disabilities. If you are collecting people's stories to share, you have a moral obligation to compensate them in some way, right? We are building social capital through social media, through podcasting, through video making. And so when we're using other people's labor, when we're using other people's content, which is what their stories are, we need to compensate people fairly for those. Do not offer or accept being paid in exposure. Now, let's move on to how you can get started with disability leadership in your accessibility project. In all of your interactions, please realize that disability disclosure requires consent. All things should require consent to be a healthy activity, but specifically, no one should be forced to disclose their disability to you in order to take part in your project. So no one should feel questioned about their disability status. Do not ask people to provide you with proof of disability in some way. It's really all about instead creating an environment where people feel supported in telling you about themselves and what they need. So, a lot of times we talk about disability accommodation. And the word accommodation is useful on the one hand because it's a shorthand for a set of conditions that make it possible or more welcoming for people with disabilities to fully participate. But it's also a problematic word on the other hand because people shouldn't need situations to be changed specifically to enable their participation. We should be creating situations that are fully inclusive, that are fully welcoming to people with all kinds of disabilities. So you think about the words accessibility and inclusion. Accessibility is actually a legal term which refers to a set of conditions that's been laid out by the Americans with Disabilities Act and is enforced in the United States, at least through lawsuit, but enforced in other countries by actual laws that talk about the baseline for creating the most flexible conditions for the most number of people with the largest number of different disabilities to participate. But inclusion is much more broad. It is referring to the set of conditions where people feel welcome to participate, where people feel that they can choose to participate, that the barriers are often much lower to participating when we think about creating inclusive situations for people with disabilities. Now, how do you ask about disability? We have come up with two different ways to think about asking about someone's disability. Because, yes, you can say, we welcome people with disabilities. We are fully inclusive of people with disabilities. But you also may want to collect data around how many people with disabilities or whether you have people with disabilities participating. So, back in 2022, CDCI partnered with Nature Conservancy of Vermont on surveying people's accessibility needs in Vermont's natural outdoor spaces. And we did this by giving a survey asking people to rank different accessibility features and how important they felt they were in Vermont's natural outdoor spaces. It was a tiny proto study as sort of a jumping off point, a place to get started in thinking about accessibility in Vermont's natural outdoor spaces. And in the survey, we asked simply, do you consider yourself disabled? And the three options were yes, temporarily yes, and no. So, a note about disabilities and different types of disabilities. You can be in one of three different general disability categories. And those categories are permanent disabilities, temporary disabilities, and situational disabilities. So, permanent disabilities are something like being blind due to loss of vision or simply being born with conditions that treat your vision differently. That's a permanent disability. Limb loss is another type of permanent disability. You can have a temporary disability. So, anyone who's been to the optometrist, where they dilate your eyes to look inside them, once you get outside back into daylight, it's really hard to see until the medication they've given you to dilate your eyes wears off. You have much less ability to see things until that medication wears off. You are temporarily disabled. Another example of temporary disability would be if you have a broken arm, for instance. We assume that the bones are going to heal. You might have a temporary disability related to your mental status based on a medication mishap or a vitamin deficiency. That is a temporary disability. It can be changed in some way back to what we legally consider fully abled. And then situational disabilities are those that result simply from outside forces and don't have anything to do with bodily difference. An example of a situational disability would be when you are trying to read a screen in full sunlight, or you're trying to listen to a video on a crowded bus and you don't have your headphones with you. Of course, you're not going to play the audio out to the rest of the bus, but you might want to watch the video regardless. That's a situational disability. When we are recruiting people for accessibility projects, we are looking for people who are permanently disabled or even have temporary disabilities. Consider both, but I think it makes sense to collect that data and make note of who is participating in this way. And again, you're going to want to figure out how to do this in a consent positive manner. Does this need to be a required question on any type of survey? The other way that we've approached this is through what's known as the Washington Group Questions. So at CDCI, my colleague, Dr. Adrienne Miao, noticed that as we were enrolling people in trainings and webinars, we originally asked people to talk about their relationship to disability, quote unquote, relationship to disability. And we asked them, what is your relationship to disability? Are you a person with a disability? Are you an adult with a disability? Are you a child with a disability? Are you the family member of a person with a disability? Are you a personal support assistant? Are you an ally? But Dr. Meow noticed that 12% of our attendees chose not to answer. So she wanted to know how we could be more inclusive. And so she did some research on what are known as the Washington Group questions. And the Washington Group questions, there's 6 of them. And they are: 1, do you have difficulty seeing? 2, do you have difficulty hearing? 3, do you have difficulty walking or climbing steps? 4, do you have difficulty remembering or concentrating? 5, do you have difficulty with self-care, such as washing all over or dressing? And 6, using your usual language, do you have difficulty communicating or being understood? Now, these questions ask people to talk about their relationship with the natural world and with the built world, with the natural environment and with the built environment. And they don't specifically talk about the legal definition of disability, but Dr. Meow believes that they create a better set of inclusive conditions. They create a more inclusive environment for people to feel comfortable disclosing their disability. And that research is ongoing, and hopefully we'll have more to share from Dr. Meow's work. As you get started with creating inclusive conditions to begin your accessibility project, you're going to want to build in accessibility from the start. This includes, at minimum, 3 different things. One are accessible meetings. An accessible meeting has hybrid options. So people can have the option of attending in person, and people can have the option of attending virtually with some of the amazing video conferencing software that's now available. CDCI recommends Zoom at this point in time as being the most accessible type of video conferencing software right now. But also think about making your meetings held in accessible real world spaces. If someone is coming in a wheelchair and with a service animal and or a caretaker, how would they get into your facility? How would they take part? Are you going to require masks at your meetings? As a number of people with disabilities have immunocompromised situations they're working with, and the COVID pandemic is still ongoing. Uh, and so, are you going to require masks? Are you going to recommend masks? Are you not going to talk about masks and say, okay, we're not requiring masks at this in person meeting, and that's why we have a virtual attendance option? You also want to think about making your website accessible from the start. So that means that your website meets or exceeds what are known as the WCAG guidelines. The WCAG guidelines are the World Consortium on Accessibility. The guidelines at this point are at 2.2, I believe, that we're supposed to be implementing. And we ask you to shoot for 2.2 double A level accessibility. WCAG guidelines have 3 levels to them. Single A means this is the basic minimum, the bare minimum of accessibility that is acceptable in any way. That means something like take videos, for example, you have the ability to turn captions on and off. Captions are available as automated captions. Double A means that this is what we are accepting as a good standard for accessibility. Uh, in our captions example, that would mean edited captions are available and you can turn them on and off. And they're implemented in such a way that they are accessible to screen readers. They're not burned into the video because that's not acceptable to screen readers. Also has a couple of other downfalls to it in terms of people's accessibility. So double A means this is a good acceptable level of accessibility. There's also a triple A level, which means gold standard best practices in accessibility, which in our example would be that the captions can be turned on and off. They've been edited for clarity. They're acceptable to screen readers. And there's also a transcript available, an edited transcript of the video. Now, the double A guidelines are legally mandatory for civic organizations such as your town or state and nonprofit and university organizations. Basically, anyone who receives federal monies is must meet or exceed double A guidelines, but they must at least meet them. And this includes making sure that your PDFs are accessible. So if you're going to send out information in PDF format, get used to making those PDFs accessible. Learn how to do that. Um, CDCI recommends that you, as much as possible, make your information available on web pages rather than PDFs, just simply because a lot of people with disabilities have a favorite browser. They have that web browser set to be customized for their own particular disability, which could mean like screen magnification, different color settings on the browser, dark or light themed, making the pointer larger. All of those are really possible with a web browser, and they're less possible with PDFs. So we recommend that you, uh, as much as possible, put your information into accessible web pages. PDFs will do in a pinch. Microsoft Word documents and Microsoft Office documents cause an equity issue because Microsoft Office is a paid product and not everyone has access to it. So that's sort of the three options for making your information available. And then the third recommendation we have for building in accessibility from the start, and we're going to talk a little bit more about this, is plain language. Plain language is the most requested improvement that we CDCI have gotten from our Community Advisory Council, that we need to work on our plain language, that they wish more things everywhere were in plain language. And the aspects of plain language are active voice, shorter sentences, a sixth grade reading level, fewer acronyms, and words of 3 syllables or less. It is so much more cost effective to start building accessibly than to go back and try to retrofit accessibility in once a project has been completed. And I think a lot of people watching this video know that, but it really, really bears repeating. As you get started inviting people with disabilities to take part in your project, ask people to tell you what they need. We talked a little bit earlier about accommodations, but people recognize the word accommodations. They know that it means, hey, we'll make these changes so that you are able to participate. And it also means if you're including this question at the beginning of your registration, at the beginning of your invitation to participate, it means we're going to set things up so that you have this from the start. So, some types of inclusive aspects you can provide are asking people if they need an assistive listening device, asking people if they need captioning, reserving a front row seat in case someone needs to lip read or needs to be closer to projected materials for their vision, making large print materials available. And large print has a lot of different variables to it. So it is always best to ask people specifically what will make them the most comfortable. Because one person's large print might be another person's overwhelming print. One person's large print might not meet the size guidelines that you often see for documents. Fun fact, the WCAG does not have sizes built in as a guideline because it is so personal to all different kinds of situations people with vision can bring to any given environment. It can be giving people an advance copy of the materials you're going to hand out or the slides you're going to project, because a lot of people need extra time to either prep themselves to participate or they need extra time by themselves in a space where they can focus to understand the materials and to really get themselves to a place where they're comfortable participating. Of course, it means wheelchair access, but it also means wheelchair access to whatever you're going to use as a working table in the room. That means that you may have fewer tables in the room because a wheelchair is a certain width and you need a certain turning radius as defined by ADA in order for people with wheelchairs to move comfortably through your room. It means that you might need to think about bringing in adjustable tables, but especially tables that are lower down. If you think about putting the materials, the handouts for a meeting on a table, how high is that table? Can someone in a wheelchair reach the materials and help themselves to the materials or to the food comfortably? It can be a scent-free room. We had someone on the podcast very recently talking about having long COVID and how that has really affected how ill they get from being in the presence of different types of scent. This can be a number of medical conditions related to chemical allergies. Could be access to a lactation room. Your disability inclusion must be intersectional, and that means accepting people's genders, people's family status. It must be anti-racist, it must be anti-homophobic, all those good things. And one way to be more inclusive is to say, hey, we can provide you with a lactation room. Hey, we can provide you with a gender neutral bathroom. Another way is diet restrictions. This is where people can tell you if they don't eat certain things. They can also say whether they have potentially life-threatening, like airborne allergies. I know someone who has a child who has a particularly dangerous allergy to tree nuts, as in they cannot be in a room with tree nuts, otherwise they will go into anaphylactic shock and it will be the whole EpiPen situation. So this is a good way to open that up. And then you can also just simply ask people to tell you what else will make them feel comfortable. So I would probably add to this sentence, not just, I will need the following accommodations in order to participate, or I will be the most comfortable in participating with the following options, and then let people choose those. Now, how will you know if your efforts have been successful? This slide has been left intentionally blank. I want everyone who is watching this video to think about how they want to measure success with their efforts. And I'll tell you why. The Royal National Institute for the Blind Scotland defines accessibility as not being complete ever. It's more of a process. It's an ongoing process. I also describe accessibility as a journey because we always want to be doing more. We want to be more inclusive and be doing better, be learning from more people with disabilities how to include more people and fit more people in and make more people welcome in our projects. So, what does success mean for you and your project? Does it mean simply that you're collecting data to know that some people with disabilities took part in your project? Does it mean that you want to know some people with disabilities were agency makers in your project, were leaders in your project? Does it mean that you increased the percentage of people with disabilities who took part in your project? Does it look more qualitative, meaning that this is more descriptive? Does it mean you gave a survey to people with disabilities who were the agency makers and the leaders in your project, and they told you, hey, This second round of the project felt a lot more inclusive. It felt a lot more welcoming. I was a lot happier. I could access more. I brought my friends with disabilities. I brought my family with members with disabilities. So I think because accessibility is a process, that we just keep iterating. And every place that you are right now is valid in terms of this journey of accessibility. You're just starting out, you've never thought about this before, you want to get started. Great. Welcome to the fight, comrade. You're maybe farther along and you want to know how to improve your efforts with people with disabilities. That's fantastic. You're iterating this process. We love this. So you and your organization really need to make this determination to know how you want to define this for your organization. We know in Vermont, 24% of Vermont adults have at least one disability. That's roughly 1 out of every 4 Vermonters. And 11% report having multiple disabilities. And that's according to the Vermont Department of Health, as reported in 2021, which we know was early in the COVID pandemic. And so, with long COVID, this mass disabling event, we can assume that those numbers are going to or have increased. Let's talk a little bit about how to make your outreach more inclusive. 54% of people in the United States read below a 6th grade reading level. That is more than half of people in the United States read below a 6th grade reading level. And there's a link to the reference there. I believe it's from 2022. But this is why we are so passionate about plain language. Plain language makes reading easier for people who have cognitive and developmental disabilities or who have difficulty reading for one reason or another. Maybe it's a concentration issue. Maybe it's dyslexia. Maybe it's a vision issue where you're a little bit slower at reading text. Or maybe you're using a screen reader and you have to listen to the screen reader tell you everything that's on a page. It also makes things easier for people who are English language learners. Let's talk about language access as an aspect of inclusion. Many people do not use English as their preferred language. And as we try to be more inclusive, that means making materials available in languages other than English. Someone not listed on this slide is your translators. We are going to assume you are working in creating English language materials. If you're going to make them available then in other languages and you hire out for translation, one of the first things your translators are going to do is to take any piece that you give them and make it plain language and then translate that plain language. If you are providing plain language materials to your translators right from the start, you will save money on your projects. We've had several translation firms let us know that this is the case. Plain language also makes reading easier for people who are super busy. Show of hands, anyone who has been making dinner with one hand, helping someone in their household with homework with the other hand, with a third mystery hand that appears out of nowhere. They're also trying to read an article their cousin sent them that was like, oh, you got to see this article. It's amazing. You got to read this. And they know they're meeting up with their cousin tomorrow. And so this is the time they have to read that article as well. People who are super busy tend to skim. They tend to read faster because they're just trying to get through it because they're so busy. Their attention is pulled in several different directions. And if you're using plain language, your communications are going to be more effective at reaching a wider number of people, greater number of people. So again, the 5 elements of plain language are active voice. Rather than the cake was eaten, it's we ate the cake. Name who is doing the thing. Name who is acting on the object. Instead of the cake was eaten, we ate the cake. That 6th grade reading level. So you're reaching, that not just everyone who does read at or above a sixth grade reading level, but folks who are below a sixth grade reading level will struggle less to get through your materials and be more inclined to participate. Simple, familiar language. This comes down to word choice. If you are choosing between words that get used frequently and words that are you encounter less commonly in English or another language, what should you choose? Choose the word that is more familiar to a greater number of people. Fewer acronyms. Oh, we love our acronyms here in the 21st century, don't we? We love them. But they're really less helpful, especially if you have a group or a project that generally has an acronym, but you only use the name of the group once in a piece of work. You might be tempted to introduce the acronym by which the project is known, but it's an extra piece of information that people with cognitive and developmental disabilities might have to hold in mind. Do you really need it? And then the last part of plain language is using words that are 3 syllables or less. And I provided some resources here in the slide. I will list them down in the description of the video so that you can learn a little bit more about plain language. So, inclusive outreach means using accessible tools to reach out to people. As of April 2025, these are what CDCI recommends as accessible tools. If you are giving out surveys, Qualtrics is the most accessible we've found. Microsoft Forms can also be accessible. You don't need a Microsoft license, a paid license to access a Microsoft form. You do need one in order to publish them, though. So that's why it's listed third on the list under Google Forms, because you can make Google Forms accessible. You just have to look at them and think about ways to make them more accessible. And that's a whole other video. We can go through accessible surveys at another time. But just know you want to use an accessible survey tool. Video meetings. We recommend Zoom as of April 2025 as having the most number of accessibility features that people can control. Even the free version of Zoom. A note here about using doodle polls for scheduling. CDCI used to use doodle polls for scheduling because we had asked people with disabilities and they said, this is great. Doodle polls work really well for us. And then we sent out a doodle poll about 2 years after we'd had that conversation. We'd collected data around polls and polling tools, and someone reached out and said, hey, bad news. The latest software update for doodle polls means it's inaccessible to screen readers. And we went, oh no. But we stopped using doodle polls until they fixed their accessibility issues. Doodle polls, please fix your accessibility issues. Thanks. Registering for events. Again, Qualtrics is the most accessible thing that we can think of. You can use Google Forms. You can use Microsoft Forms. As of April 2025, something like Eventbrite is much less accessible. So do a little bit of research on your tools. And again, plain language. How do we know if we're using plain language? How do we know if we are hitting that sixth grade reading level? Well, there's a tool called readable.com that is free for you to copy and paste in snippets of language, and it will tell you how close you're getting to sixth grade level. It will tell you what specifically you can do to get to a sixth grade level. We love some free tools. As you are reaching out to people with disabilities in Vermont, here are a number of disability advocacy groups that love to make connections. So you've got Green Mountain Self Advocates. You've got us, the UVM Center on Disability and Community Inclusion. We have social media. We have newsletters. We will help you boost your message and get it out to a greater number of people with disabilities in Vermont. We have the Disability Rights Vermont group here in Vermont, which mainly pertains to legal aspects of disability. Vermont Center for Independent Living, VCIL, fabulous group connecting people with disabilities with ways of better being included in activities in their communities. Especially, they do an amazing job with disaster preparedness. The Vermont Family Network connects with the family members of people with disabilities in Vermont because families have unique needs as they are trying to provide for both children and adults with disabilities. The National Alliance on Mental Illness, NAMI, has a Vermont chapter, as does the Brain Injury Association. The Vermont Association for the Blind and Visually Impaired. Those are folks who will also help you figure out how to be more inclusive. And All Brains Belong Vermont is a group of people with autism or people on the autism spectrum who can help you think through some neurodiversity issues and can help you connect potentially with neurodiverse populations. So thanks for sticking with this. I appreciate you watching this video and for considering how to be more inclusive in terms of disability and accessibility. This is a quote from somebody who answered our survey on what can make Vermont's natural outdoor spaces more inclusive and accessible. Quote unquote, I use a wheelchair and access to natural and wild spaces is so limited. It's such a gift to find a place I can access. It's more memorable to me because I think able bodied people may take access to nature for granted, but it's sacred and special. This work matters. Inclusion for people with disability matters. And finally, here's 4 for the door. 1, resist the freak out. Again, accessibility can be hard, but it's a process. You just keep at it. You just keep doing things, keep trying to make things better. Take all the examples I've given you, all the recommendations I've given you today, and just pick one. Pick one. And decide for the next 30 days, that's what you're going to focus on. Maybe write it on a sticky and put that sticky on your laptop screen. So it's there whenever you're sitting down to work and you're like, oh, that's right. I'm going to focus on plain language. I'm going to focus on plain language. I'm going to focus on plain language. And then after 30 days, maybe pick something else in your from the recommendations that we've given here and focus on that for the next 30 days. None of us work in a vacuum. You are always encouraged to ask for help. Contact CDCI, contact the other advocacy groups in Vermont and ask, what's the best way to do something? How can we get together? 3, get feedback from people with disabilities. People with disabilities are the experts on disability. Nothing about us without us. And if you find you often don't have time for accessibility, ask yourself, what are you making time for instead? Thank you so much for your time and watching this video. This video and the slides and resources are licensed under Creative Commons Attribution, Non-Commercial, Share Alike, which means that you are free to share them and remix them for commercial use as long as you give CDCI credit. Thanks for listening.